Howdy, folks. Welcome to Redneck Gone Green. I'm your host, David Cobb, and I am the Redneck. And you damn right I've gone green. And my hope is that I can convince you to go green too. But make no mistake about it. Yes, it's the Green Party, but I am not an electoral fetishist. When I say go green, I mean deep ecology. And as a redneck, I mean, yeah, I'm a redneck, but I also know the history of redneck that goes back to Blair Mountain and the coal miners, goes back to the Scottish revolutionaries. The point is this, y'all. This whole program is designed to confront reality. And here's the reality. We are living in revolutionary times. That's because the entire structure of society is being reorganized, whether I like it or not, whether you like it or not, whether Jeff Bezos, Donald Trump, Warren Buffett, it don't matter who likes it or doesn't like it. Objective reality is changing. And here's why. Because we got an ecological catastrophe. It's not coming. It's here and getting worse every day. And newsflash, it's going to get worse. But wait, there's more. We also are living in truly end stage capitalism. I used to say late stage capitalism, but I think that we're literally in the end game of how the current political economy works. Why? Because automation, robotics, technology, and now artificial intelligence is literally forcing how goods and services are produced and distributed are completely changing. And if we actually had democratic control over this technology, y'all, we'd be living in paradise, right? Like there's enough to go around and it would be amazing. But unfortunately, a small, I almost said ruling elite, but I've stopped myself. A predatory class has literally controlled, seized, and have control of both the means of production and these two technologies. And lastly, the political crisis, right? So we have an ecological crisis, we have an economic crisis. Those two crises are provoking this current political crisis. And the political crisis is the current political system cannot solve any of these problems. To be clear, I don't mean that the current political system can't solve the problem of white supremacy or heteropatriarchy. This political system was not designed to solve those problems. I'm saying something different. I'm saying this system cannot even do what it was designed to do, which is maintain order. Fascism is rising, not only in this country, but across the globe as a rational, reasonable, horrific, and evil response to those crises. So here at Redneck Gone Green, what we're saying is, we believe the only way to confront fascism is to create systems and processes that make the seeds of fascism wither and die. Neoliberalism is not the answer. The Democratic Party leadership exhortation to Trump is horrible, vote harder, ain't going to get it done. We're going to have to build new systems and structures even as the system collapses. That's what Redneck Gone Green is all about. Every week we come to you with a guest to do a deep dive on a particular topic that says, all right, it's awful. Ain't it awful? What is to be done? It's in that spirit that I'm very excited to say the topic this week, mutual aid. And I am a practitioner of mutual aid and the creator of mutual aid networks. I know that they can be incredibly powerful, very uplifting. I also know that there are some specific limits. I'm going to be bringing in another colleague, friend, comrade who is knee deep in practicing mutual aid right now. Her name is Michelle Eddelman-McCormick. I've gotten to know Michelle Eddelman in her role as a co-founder of Cooperation Vermont. They're doing amazing work. And unless you've been under a rock, you know that Vermont has just undergone like once in a, 500-year flood. These things are happening all the time, right? But the point is, she is actually building new institutions and had to shift on a dime and start mutual aid networks. So we're going to talk to her about what she's learned. With that, I want to welcome my friend, Michelle Eddelman-McCormick, to Redneck Gone Green. Hey, Michelle.
Hey, David. Thanks so much for having me on tonight. It's good to see you.
It's always good to see you. And again, like we know each other. So let's just be super transparent here. And I also want to encourage folks, because a couple of people have already done so, use that comment section. Our friend Michelle, Rebecca Lurie, is on the line, sending you some love. Catherine is here. So we've got a couple of other listeners. So I'm going to encourage folks, feel free to use that comment section. Ask a question, make a comment, but really the whole point here is to do a deep dive on mutual aid. But before we do that, Michelle, I know who you are. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself to the Redneck Gone Green audience to say, who the hell are you and why do you do what you do?
That's a good question. Sometimes I ask myself that, actually. So again, my name is Michelle Eddelman-McCormick, and I currently reside in Marshfield, Vermont, which is in central Vermont, along the US 2 corridor, because it's a very small town and people don't often know where it is, but it's not far from Montpelier. And currently I am the director at Cooperation Vermont and the general manager of the worker-owned cooperative at the Marshfield Village store. And I'm also a coordinator at Regeneration Corps, and of course the Cooperation Vermont Community Land Trust that we've recently formed. And I also serve locally as the chair of our local planning commission and a trustee at our Jackwith Library. So I wear a lot of hats currently, and feel like sometimes I'm a clown in a 3-ring circus with all the juggling that I do. But prior to coming to Vermont, I had moved up from Naples, Florida. And prior to that was in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, doing disaster response work in the lower Ninth Ward. And then after, leaving, I was only supposed to be in New Orleans for 9 days. And 3 years later, I left after my first son was born. And because it was still just not a place that made sense for me to be without any family.
So I'm going to stop you for a minute,
yeah.
Michelle, because like you just said it so casually, right? But I really want to underscore to the audience, our listeners, our viewers. So you literally transplanted yourself from your corporate job, because I know you had a well-paying corporate job. You went down, you were expecting you were going to take your vacation time and start doing some direct aid or mutual aid, direct assistance in the wake of Hurricane Katrina, right?
I was actually at that time living in San Francisco and then working at the East Bay Community Law Center. So that wasn't my corporate job shtick. I was, still kind of, I don't know, wide-eyed and hopeful about the nonprofit industrial complex as I've come to know it at the time. This is in my mid-20s. And so I left that job on a vacation for 9 days and ended up taking the rest of my vacation. And then they let me have a sabbatical. And then I ended up just, making the permanent dive to stay, doing the work that I was doing in New Orleans in the lower Ninth Ward. And then went on to do a project that was the program director for a project that was providing primary pediatric and mental health services to children in these mobile units that had zero access to any form of health care after the storm when my first son was born. And then he just got to the age where he couldn't be in his little sling that I used to carry him around in, and actually wanted to get down on the ground and crawl around and have a normal kid life. And I couldn't be in New Orleans anymore. And that's when I went to Naples, Florida.
So hold on a second, because before, like you put 3 years in New Orleans and the Katrina aftermath. And so really, I'm not trying to blow sunshine up your ass, Michelle, but like that's kind of the proving ground for the most extensive effort to do mutual aid in real time as the result of a disaster that we've had in this country.
Yeah, I mean, in the, I don't know how much time we want to spend on it, but that was massive, and it was, very cross-cutting in so many ways. And in the lower Ninth Ward, for my time that I was there, I was responsible for, a project that one, challenged the government's position to keep people out of the neighborhood. They literally had it sealed off for, so, storm happened in end of August, September, October, November, over about almost 4 months. They had it completely sealed off where nobody could come in or out of the neighborhood. So people's flood damaged properties were just literally sitting like they were the day after the storm. They couldn't go in and check on their properties. They couldn't go and try and retrieve their belongings. They couldn't go in and look for loved ones who were still missing.
Right. And so, Michelle, Rebecca asked in the chat, were you in New Orleans as a lawyer?
I was not. And after being in New Orleans and working with the East Bay Community Law Center before that, after like the first 2 years, I actually sat for the LSATs and considered going to law school. And then I had my first son, and that kind of changed the trajectory. But I think it was still, I mean, aside from my son being absolutely amazing, the right course of action for me, because I think I would have ended up feeling pretty futile trying to fight the good fight within the quote legal system.
So, Michelle, I'm going to stop you for a moment because I know that many of our viewers and listeners are always inspired by, but oftentimes in the comments and questions, what I want to do is say, all right, so you're in New Orleans doing, quote, mutual aid. Tell us in your best definition, what would you say mutual aid is, and what did it look like in New Orleans?
So that's a two-part question. And the first part of what did it look like for the project that I was working on was one, challenging that look and leave. So then they opened up the neighborhood to a look and leave where you could come in, you could drive wherever you could drive, where the roads had been cleared enough, but you had to be out by 4:00 and PM, and you couldn't get out of your car, you couldn't go onto property, you couldn't touch anything. So on January 1st, we staged a direct action where we got a lease on a house that was flood damaged and went in with 100 volunteers, full Tyvek and respirators and the whole thing, and started working on a house. And of course, the National Guard and the local police and Blackwater. Blackwater's first time the Blackwater was ever deployed on U.S. soil was after Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. So Blackwater was there as well. And we weren't sure what they were going to do, but they didn't do anything except just lurk about. And so we proceeded to work. And then we came back the next day. And so the idea was that we would be challenging that order. Either you were going to arrest us and we would have standing to challenge that in court, or you weren't going to arrest us and it would serve to normalize other people being able to work on their properties as well. And the latter is what ended up happening.
And so, folks, I really want to underscore. So mutual aid, like at its most simple form, is simply voluntary reciprocal exchange of resources that are needed for mutual benefit. In this case, and in most cases, it is a response to disaster relief. And what you're seeing is, and listening to Michelle Eddelman-McCormick of Cooperation Vermont explaining in New Orleans how they literally said, we're going to force the state to either acknowledge that people have the right to go back to their homes, or you got to arrest us. Like either way, it's a win because we have a movement ready to move on either one of those. So before we go further, Michelle, Catherine, who's a frequent viewer and listener, asked, wait a minute, what reason did the government give for not letting folks go in to check on their own damn property?
It's a very good question. And it's just another really gloriously obvious case in point of how these disasters are used, to further consolidate real estate markets and for big land grabs. Just a few months prior to the storm, where, so the lower Ninth Ward is that neighborhood that the canal runs across, where everybody saw the barge break the canal in the storm. And well, actually, it was after the storm. So that's another thing, right? Is like the storm had actually passed when the levee broke, and then 14 feet of water rushed within minutes into the lower Ninth Ward. But that industrial canal intersects with the Mississippi River. And there was a naval station at that corner of the Mississippi River and the industrial canal. And just a few months prior to the storm, the Port of Orleans had contracted with the naval station to actually take that over and to convert it to a cruise ship terminal that would be capable of docking 3 cruise ships simultaneously. So now all of a sudden, this, historically Black neighborhood, this is some of the first land in New Orleans that, Black folks were able to allowed to build on, right? And we're talking generational homes, like multi-generational homes. Has some of the highest home ownership rates in the country, actually. And now all of a sudden, this neighborhood is in the way of their parking lots and t-shirt shops. So this was a prime opportunity. They thought they were going to have to do it the old-fashioned way, lot by lot, block by block, buying up and kicking people out of their properties and, condemning homes and all the usual tactics. And then the storm came through, and within a few minutes had accomplished, in their mind, what they had long hoped for. Because this neighborhood is also an extension of a series of gentrifying, projects that it goes from like the French Quarter to this, also somewhat bougie and upcoming, Marigny to the Bywater. And then on the other side of that canal is the part of the lower Ninth Ward called the Holy Cross. So yeah, it was a big land grab scheme, and they were just outright, keeping people from, coming home. And
so, Catherine, I want to stop for a moment because I want to make sure that both Catherine and everybody listening or watching understands that the only rational reason for not allowing people in particular neighborhoods, it was straight up racism, right? Like there wasn't even any bones about it. It was literally to carry out disaster capitalism, to allow the predatory class to say, oh, we've had our eyes on this for a minute. And they literally used it as an opportunity and gave the excuse of, oh, it's not safe here. But interestingly, other places people were allowed to go back to, but they specifically forbid folks in particular neighborhoods not to return to their property. Fair?
Fair. I mean, that's exactly what happened. So we, from there, we mold remediated the house, and then we started sleeping in it overnight, and then furthering the process of normalizing people being in the neighborhood overnight. And it's important, I think, to note also that there were individuals who never left.
Right.
They rode out that storm, survived on their roofs, in their trees, like National Guard flying over to get to the white neighborhood on the other side of the lower Ninth Ward, literally helicopter flying over people for days while people hung in their trees in the lower Ninth Ward.
Catherine has the right response in the comments section. She says, this pisses me off. Are some folks still trying to recover their property, or do you know?
So, that end of the fight literally took, a couple of years and is actually ongoing, right? To this day. And Hurricane Katrina happened in 2005. So 18 years later, we did serve to normalize that. And we got more leases on flood damaged houses, and opened up a distribution center. We were giving out, food and cleaning supplies and that sort of thing. But it was really, as folks were now in that look and leave status, were coming through the neighborhood and they would see us there, and we were able to get in contact with folks and then ask them, hey, can we help you with your house? Can we go and do a structural assessment? Can we go and muck it out? Can we go, gut it, mold remediate it? Can we help you with your property? And we created a tool lending library. And then we ended up opening up, some temporary housing and a community kitchen because people were displaced all over the place trying to come back and work on the weekends and at nights and in different things on their property, but there was no place to stay while they did. And so, there were times where, like, the spring break after the storm, so that would have been like March of 2006, we had 1,000 volunteers just in the lower Ninth Ward. And I think that is, was a really extremely eye-opening experience for me as well, because there were folks who came in from all over, while the main forces that were grounding for long-term, volunteers, the various projects throughout the city and in the lower Ninth Ward were people who were politically minded and were activist oriented. There were folks who came in from baseball teams from the Midwest. We had groups of Mennonites. We had, college students on break for spring break. But we had 1,000, volunteers in the month of March that year, just in the lower Ninth Ward. People came from all over, and everybody was just, heartbroken, angry. There was a lot of anger, right? And some of that anger I still carry today. And, it's I think these, these disasters and these mutual aid opportunities. So, like, going back to, I think, really to one of your core questions, right? It's like, what is mutual aid? What differentiates it from, like, charity work, right? It is, for me, the political point of all of it, right? It's 2 points. It is building local, resilience and working class, taking care of itself with each other, for each other, in a way that highlights, right, the contradictions of capital. It highlights the role, there's a word, I can't think of it, the discrepancies between the role that people think the government is supposed to play and the role that it actually plays.
Right. And Michelle, I want to stop for a moment because I need to interrupt just long enough to remind viewers and listeners you're watching and or listening to Redneck Gone Green. I'm your host, David Cobb. I am the redneck who's gone green and trying to convince you to do it too. We're talking to Michelle Eddelman-McCormick. Michelle is a co-founder of Cooperation Vermont, as a longtime social change agent and skilled mutual aid practitioner. She's talking about her experience in New Orleans. I also want to remind you, if you're listening or watching, please comment, like, share. Like, this is the only way we can bust through the corporate algorithm so that more and more folks are able to participate. I'm happy to tell you we're getting hundreds of viewers. We're getting thousands of readers on Substack. So make sure you subscribe to us on Substack. I put out a writing every week. We do a weekly podcast and this video blog. We're on Rumble. We're on YouTube. We're about to get onto Facebook. So it's working. Michelle, the other thing I want to do is to bring up, for me, speaking about being pissed off, infamous photographer, a series of photographs. You'll probably recognize it. Jackrabbit, throw that up on the screen, will you? Because this, to me, really underscores.
I knew you were
Michelle,
going to put that up.
What are we looking at?
I knew you were going to put that up. These are 2 headlines, right? One is, people.
Let me read the headline since I know it.
I can tell you off the top of my head, but you go ahead.
Hit it. No, hit it. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I don't want to.
So on the left, it reads, a young man walks through chest-deep water after looting a grocery store in New Orleans on Tuesday, August 30th, 2005. Floodwaters continue to rise in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina did extensive damage when it made landfall on Monday. It's an AP photo. That's the one on the left. You ready? The one on the right. 2 residents wade through chest-deep water after finding bread and soda from a local grocery store after Hurricane Katrina came through the area on August 29 in New Orleans, Louisiana. Katrina was downgraded to a Category 4 storm as it approached. Also, an AP story. So the same damn entity are putting out these images the same basic time. Michelle, help me figure out what's going on here.
Good old-fashioned racism, live and well, you know? I mean, and that's continues, right? I mean, like that is one iconic example of, you know, that just the AP and right after Katrina and that discrepancy, but that gets repeated over and over and over and over. And then I start to see, like, you know, these things popping up after, you know, storms. So then, you know, after Katrina, I moved to Naples, Florida. So I'm still in Hurricane Alley, right? And then I end up ask Michelle to look at the camera. Oh, sorry, y'all. I'm on my phone, and I'm also not
it's all good. It's all good.
So anyway, my neighborhood gets hit by Hurricane Irma, and I ended up stepping up in my community there and doing a bunch of mutual aid work there. And so then, you know, after, you know, each of these hurricanes that are coming through or do come through or about to come through, there's just one after another in, you know, the Gulf states. And so you start to see people preemptively putting things on their, you know, houses, like looters will be shot, and you know, looters be warned, and people threatening violence about, you know, what they call, you know, looters. And it's just like, you know, just absolutely no perspective at all of like what it means to be actually out there literally trying to figure out how to survive from moment to moment. And those, yeah.
So I know that this can trigger some complex PTSD for you. So thanks for hanging in there with us, and thanks for what you do. I do want to point out that Rebecca puts into the comments, the New Orleans Lower Ninth Ward hit the repeat button in Maui. Disaster capitalism is here. It's happening. Mutual aid takes a different tack because of different values. And I do want to shift, right? So you are literally in Vermont, and you went there, what, about a year and a half ago, I think, literally as a climate refugee.
About 2 years, yeah.
Yeah, 2 years. So tell us because I know the story, right? I was about what you've done in Vermont, but when you landed in, like, why Vermont, and what did you do?
So why Vermont? You know, after New Orleans, and since then, you know, it's been a series of ongoing conversations, you know, about the rise of fascism in our country, and about, you know, the realities of climate change, and trying to, you know, think through to the best that we can, you know, where are the future generations of movement leaders, of revolutionaries, going to be able to potentially, you know, live and survive and thrive and carry on the movement in a worst case scenario, right? And Vermont, you know, is slated to be one of those places that is going to be more climate resilient. And people are like, wow, about those floods in July, you know, do I still think that's the case? And they actually, yes, I do. And I'm actually more affirmed in that perspective that, you know, Vermont is going to be, you know, more resilient than, there's no safe place in this climate, you know, change paradigm, just as there's no safe space in this empire, right? but I do think that it's going to continue to be more resilient. So that was the idea of, making the move to Vermont and starting to seed a project that, hopefully the idea is that, we're able to create a zone that is able to be self-sustaining, as an example to other communities about, how they can also be self-sustaining. So not just, on some isolationist, bug out thing, but starting to create an example of, how do we organize, resource, and govern ourselves as things continue to fall apart around us.
And so when you were in Vermont, you didn't just wait for a disaster, right? Like you actually had a specific, like you began building alternatives. Tell us a bit about what you were doing in Vermont with Cooperation Vermont.
Yeah, so with Cooperation Vermont, our first project was to purchase the Marshfield Village store as a way to center ourselves in the community, and to be able to rapid fire engage with a broad spectrum of the folks that live around us, so that it's not just people on the left talking to people on the left, or people of particular political leaning talking to people of that same. So it's not just the echo chamber of things, but really doing real community organizing and building worker solidarity by putting us in a place that is where everybody in the community comes to the Marshfield Village store, and we're able to have real-time engagement and conversation with folks from a broad base. And I always tell people that some of my favorite conversations with start with "fuck Biden," right? And because we get a good bit of that, and so I was just like, yes, let's have that conversation. Yes, fuck Biden, but here's why. And so it's been a really great opportunity to do some of that work and to build some of those relationships. And I think that it's a key thing that I want to point to, is that oftentimes, I just want to emphasize the importance of doing revolutionary work really is relationship building, right? It's making connections with other human beings in a way that creates solidarity amongst ourselves. And I don't think there's any shortcutting that.
Michelle, I'm going to stop because I've been in the Marshfield Village store and I've been throughout New England, and like it's kind of a big deal, right? So for folks who may not be in Vermont and may not understand the importance of a town village store, tell us what a village store is, and more importantly, what it means to a community like Marshfield.
So, to a town like Marshfield, there's one little convenience store that has super convenient goods and a 2-pump gas station. And then there's the Marshfield Village store, which has, basic groceries. It has a deli and is like the hub for the community, coming and going, there. Oh, look, there we are.
There you are.
There we are. It's so cute. It's the community's store. And then, there's our library and community center, which our events, take place out of, our community concerts and all the other things. But really, aside from when we have specific events or community supper at the library space, the Marshfield Village store is where really community congregates in our town. And so that was the first thing we did. We converted it to a worker-owned cooperative, and in addition to actually doing that work, and also just a shout out to thank David Cobb, and Kamal Franklin from Community Movement Builders, who's also part of the People's Network for Land and Liberation that Cooperation Vermont is part of. Came and did a series of trainings for folks when we were in the conversion process for changing the store's ownership from a family-owned business to a worker-owned cooperative. And that was a really great opportunity to do broad-based education with the community about, well, what is a worker-owned cooperative? And, why does that matter? And why do we, think that that's an important model? And having conversations around economic democracy.
And I just want to point out, look up on the screen, Michelle. This is one of my favorite photographs of you. There you are, merchant that you are, selling some groceries and having a conversation with the Marshfield resident.
Yep, and that guy is Ken Goki. He comes in for coffee every morning, and actually just put power steering fluid in my truck right before I got on the road today.
And so, folks,
small town,
so
Vermont.
Michelle literally like just sort of casually said, so, hey, here is the central part of a rural economy. It is the grocery store. It is the convenience store. Like right there, you share a parking lot with the gas station. Like I know that's kind of the center right there on Route 2, right? And oh, by the way, been 150 years in that community, and it operates now as a business. How?
As a worker-owned cooperative.
As a worker-owned cooperative. And Michelle, walk us through what that actually, like, what did it take to transition from like employees who had always, like, they were running the joint, but they had never been owners. They weren't thinking like owners. What was that process like, and what lesson did you learn?
Yeah, so in this particular instance, there were folks who were working as employees who acted like they were, employees, and but then there were a couple, and one in particular who was related to the previous owners, but always really ran the deli, and then a young man who grew up working in the store and then was just working there part-time while he was working at our local school full-time. Who really did take a lot of pride in the store, and it does mean a lot to them personally. And but they didn't have ownership shares, and so for those folks, they were, I think, uniquely really poised to be able to step into those roles as a worker owner, because they innately felt that sense of responsibility and care for the work that they did at the store and for the community, and the role that the store has in the community. And then for other folks, it's been an ongoing process, and these things don't happen. There's no shortcut to building good culture, right? We can't policy our way or bylaw our way into good culture. We have to build it, and that takes practice, and it takes relationship building, and that's where we're at. So we're there, and it's working, and I'm super pleased to say that it's working.
It's totally working. And I also got to say, like, after you converted the Marshfield, and thanks for the kind words to me and Kamal. It was a great experience. So after y'all converted the Marshfield Village store into a worker-owned cooperative to be really the center of the Cooperation Vermont experiment, you are working now with Kali Akuno and Grace Gershoni and others to create the cooperation, or a new community land trust, right? Under the network of Cooperation Vermont. So y'all are already in the moving, building alternatives, getting things ready, and then boom, once in 1,000 year, once in 200 year flood happens, which are happening all the time, right? And so on a dime, you had to shift. So you took the lessons learned from Katrina and New Orleans and did what?
Yeah, so from New Orleans to Florida and back again, right? I knew that it was coming, because it's unavoidable, I think, for any of our communities. We have to have that framework that it was coming. And prior to the storm, like literally the month before, as part of the Planning Commission and part of Cooperation Vermont, we were having conversations about convening a quote resilience hub with all the folks who are organizing or working on a project, the community supper, the community garden folks, our Twinfield Mentoring Together program, our recreation program, all the people that do different things in our community actually coming together to figure out how we can strengthen those ties and build those networks better and start to, cross collaborate and communicate and all of those things. And then we were talking about putting together like a food sovereignty project survey, really just trying to figure out what food is being produced locally, and, would it meet the caloric needs, which it would, of course, for our community, because we have some larger farmers, but then, how far out would we be able to do that? So kind of doing some of this planning and prep work, and then boom, right? I mean, I knew it was, probably going to come, potentially going to come, just given my orientation that it always seems to come. But I just didn't think it was going to be so soon. And so when it did, the night of the storm, we ended up sheltering like 36 people in the apartment that I live in above the store, in the parking lot. And then by the very next afternoon, before we even had electricity back, we had organized with, our one of our local food vendors who has like Mo's Backyard Barbecue. He's got one of those big barbecue trailers, to come out to the parking lot, and we fed, a couple hundred people before we even had electricity back. And then we were able to organize with our neighbors to have, 800 gallons of water on a truck outside of the store, because our water system completely went out. Our water and sewage went completely out for the village. So unless you had well or spring driven, and then of course the wells were questionable with contamination, should be tested. But, we in the village had zero running water at all, and the sewage system collapsed as well. So the store, within, 12 hours of the storm having hit, was prepared to both shelter people. We were prepared to feed people. We were giving out water. We had, the 800 gallons. We were giving out all of our bottled water that we had stockpiled. And then we're starting to, connect with neighbors and putting up, the process for us to be able to organize volunteers, people who needed help or both, and starting the process for some of that mutual aid work. And it was about 10 days before we saw a single really outside resource come into the neighborhood. And it was only after the governor's conference, where they apparently were unaware that Marshfield didn't have any water, and it was a little bit of a shit show for sure on behalf of state government. and so then we were news. We were all of a sudden we were news, right?
So Michelle, I got to say, you're really begging me to ask the question, because you're answering the question that Z Manny, who is a frequent participant and viewer listener here on Redneck Gone Green. Z Manny asks, can you compare how mutual aid responses to such crises differed from more conventional responses in terms of how they approach this and in terms of how effective they were?
Yeah. So it's like second, first, same as the first, right? Like this, it's absolutely nothing new in that, the folks that are organizing locally on the ground, literally anywhere you go, that are doing any kind of mutual aid work, or self-organized, work, whether it's, leftist or otherwise, right, actually have a handle on what's needed, what's going on, and how best to serve the community. And then you have these overfunded, ineffectual, just stumbling all over themselves groups. And I'll put the Red Cross at the top of that list. So, decades now, disgusted with the entire entity. Ask me more. It's a whole other show. And, and they have so much money, and they come in and they just fumble around and they don't actually help. And it's just like insult to injury, honestly. It's like one thing to be stuck with the resources that you're able to muster, locally, or that come to you within reach, and being able to like do the work that you need to do. But then to have like these fake resources around you that don't actually help, aren't really available to you, but you can see like in your face all the time the amount of money, so much money, that goes to entities like the Red Cross, and all they do is just piss it away. It's disaster capitalism at its best. I mean, honestly, aside from FEMA, like the Red Cross are the biggest disaster pimps like on the planet.
So, Michelle, I want to make sure to let you know that another long time or frequent long time. This is our 5th episode, right? But somebody who participates with us and really makes me excited to see Kelly again, who's really been a phenomenal participant in the chat. Kelly writes in to say, "This is so infuriating. It's so awesome that you, Michelle, we're there to help." So I just want to let you know that, I'm not the only one. Kalia, like many people who hear this story recognize you're kind of a rock star, right? About being able to do what it is that you're doing. But it also pushes me to bring Z Manny's question in, who says, can you talk about what you've seen in people's relationships in situations like this, whether it's a worker-owned cooperative, in terms of the quality of life for those operating in the institution? So this is a real, like, legitimate question. Like, have you seen, and because I've met Jack, right? Like I've met, I've met these people, right? I've talked to them, and I'm asking you, have you seen any change, or is it no, they are who they are. They just got a different job.
The answer is actually both, right? Because
right.
no, like these were folks that are community minded, like already, right? And I have to just put a plug in on Jack, because he flew out the morning of the storm because he also coaches basketball at our local school, and they were having like this basketball convention thing where some of the kids and the teams and the coaches. Anyway, this dude was in Vegas, right? And so he's calling me once we got electricity and could actually make phone calls again, because again, there's no cell phone reception at all whatsoever, not even on a good day or a bad day. In Marshfield. So if you lose electricity, you lose Wi-Fi, you lose the ability to communicate with the outside world. We're back to like sending smoke signals and carrier pigeons. But Jack calls me and he's just like, "Oh my God, I feel so bad. I'm not there. My community needs me and I'm not there." And it's just like, as I'm hearing the slot machines in the background, I'm like, "Okay, Jack, I'm going to hang up now." But Deb and everybody else, like all the folks that were already, at the store were community minded. And, we had our employees who were walking down their roads, because you can't drive by car. So they were walking, and they were taking their one wheels to like come in and work at the store. We had a couple of, our coworkers that stayed overnight with me to like help, with all the folks who were sheltered at the store overnight. Literally traversing the terrain on foot to be able to get to the store as the community center to be able to help their neighbors.
Michelle, so Jack and Deb, who I personally met, and I met them before they became worker owners. So I got to tell you, like straight up, during the mutual aid, during the flood, they acted like they would have anyway, because that's the kind of human beings they are.
And Tom and Carl.
But the difference is, as worker owners of the store, are you starting to see them think and act differently? Like, instead of just being worker employees, are they starting to think and act like worker owners? That's the question I'm posing to you. Yeah,
absolutely. That's the short answer.
Yeah, right. Because, and this is the thing, I haven't been back there since it converted, but I knew the answer was yes, because that's what happens everywhere. I'm also going to let you know that Jack Rabbit, our our executive producer, you've inspired him. He's usually off camera, but I can see he's eager to jump in. So Jack Rabbit, welcome to this side of the camera. What's on your mind?
Hey,
thanks, David. Hi, Michelle, again. Thank you so much for being a part of our show. Really appreciate it so much. I had to jump in because when you started talking about the Red Cross and FEMA and how worthless they are, it really just kind of reminded me so much of my experience in Occupy Sandy, when Hurricane Sandy hit New York. And some friends of mine, the next day they went down to I forget exactly where the location where it hit on the beach, but they just went down there and we used our Occupy network that we had built, just kind of like the connections that we had made, and really just kind of like put together a disaster response, and didn't see anything from, FEMA or the Red Cross for a really long time. And it's just amazing to hear you talk about that. What fascinates me is, like, you bring up how much money they have, right? There's so much money in these institutions, right? Like FEMA, the Red Cross, they have amazing amounts of resources. And yet for people who are on the ground working where disasters are happening, we see it happening in Maui as well, right? I mean, people just like being left to fend for themselves. I think it's fascinating that we're talking about mutual aid while we're seeing more and more these natural disasters are happening, one after the other. It's either, it's the pandemic, it's a fire, it's a hurricane, it's a flood. And I mean, I think that what I would love to hear you kind of talk about is that people who think that there's going to be a cavalry in the form of the federal government who are going to come to help them out. I feel like I would love to hear a little bit more about your thoughts about that. And like you said, I think that there's definitely disaster responses, maybe a future Redneck on Green that we might want to have. But I just if you can just comment on the contrast between that national federal, those institutions versus the effectiveness and the need for a ground level mutual aid kind of response, if you want to kind of touch on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Hang on one second.
And so I'll just point out, and that is that adorable child we've been seeing in the background. So welcome.
He wants to be heard so bad. Say hi, Doug.
Hey, welcome to the life of radical organizer and mom, Michelle.
Hashtag mom life. Okay, so two things. One is it was a little bit different in my experience here recently in Vermont, in that folks have a different kind of relationship to government. One, all of our local governments are volunteer governments, right? Our select board is a volunteer, our planning commission is volunteer. We have a full-time, paid town clerk and an assistant clerk, and then aside from our 3-person road crew, those are the only employed people in our town government, right? And so there's a different kind of relationship. And then I feel like they're, for a variety of reasons, both I think on the left and the right of traditional political linear spectrums, people have a different perspective than other places that I've been. And I don't think that they were actually waiting for the government to show up to a large extent, except for when it was days in and the water crisis is still a thing and we don't have any running water. It's 8 days, 9 days, 10 days. It's just okay, well, shit, shouldn't somebody be helping, right? And, there's a different level of built-in resilience in Vermont in general, but where I'm at in particular. But that is needed across the country, right? There's an article that, if you go to Kali Akuno's blog spot, it's Navigating the Storm. And it's one of the last articles that he published on that blog spot. And it I forget the exact title of it, but it's what's to be done, basically. And within that, he talks about organizing within a 10-mile radius. And if you're in a tighter urban environment, maybe that's 10 blocks. If you're in a really rural environment, maybe that's 20 miles, rural and 20 miles. But really starting to organize to collectively, prior to a disaster, start to think about, the food security needs of the community, and how can we be working together to, outside of, the capitalist infrastructure, systems for our food, can we be organizing for that? What kind of, security and communication, channels can we be creating? Like, what are the things that need to be done now in preparation in our communities so that we're stronger, tighter, and more prepared for all events? You know, because like, let's face it, again, there's no safe space, one, in Empire or in this climate crisis for literally anybody. And we have to be building those infrastructure and supports and those relationships now, because waiting until, disaster strikes is really not the look.
And Michelle, I know that you're on your phone, so you're not able to be following the comments and chats, but so I'll just let you know, our mutual friend, Michael Nugent, who you met during the Eco-Socialism from Below, is here giving you some love. And I feel like you channeled Michael, because Michael literally asked, mutual aid work in the response to crisis seems like they would be fantastic for developing a radical sharing culture. Can you explain how building this culture is related to a strategy of build and fight, and how the networks and culture y'all are building can be protected as it scales up? I kind of feel like you already said that, but I just want to point out, Michael, the lady didn't even know you asked the question, and boom, she's Johnny on the spot answering it. I also want to let you know that Z-Manny wrote back in again and said, fascinating point about how this kind of organic engagement is more perceptive and flexible. It seems to be actually focusing on the situation at hand in its own terms. Those that are affected are calling the shots, right? And I think that there's something very powerful about, like, this. It's not just a talking point to say the impacted community should be like centered. It's like, no, like, if you like the Red Cross, they mean well.
Do they?
Well,
do they? I mean, I think that the average
we're going to have you back on. Kelly says, oh my God, like, would be so great to have her back on for another show to do a how-to, showing the steps to do this in our own community. So we're coming to the end. I'm going to put you on the spot, Michelle. You're my friend. Will you promise to come back on and do a how to get ready to do mutual aid? Because you were kind of uniquely positioned and seasoned to be able to do this from the shit show that you went through in Katrina.
Yeah, uniquely positioned from shit shows, multiple, because again, it was 2 more hurricanes in Naples. And, I left to Vermont to kind of get a little breather from all of that. And either this climate crisis is real, or I'm just like the harbinger of death. I can't really decide which at the moment. But the answer to your question is absolutely. I'll come hang out with you anytime, David.
All right. Well, looky here, y'all. This hour has just flown by. You heard it here. Michelle has promised to come back on, Kelly. So thanks for giving me the excuse to put her on the hook to make sure she comes back in for a more specific how-to. And you'll notice it wasn't much of a hook. Michelle, and I'm going to tease y'all, stick around for a special announcement after Michelle Eddelman-McCormick's last final thoughts.
Yeah. So oddly, my final thought really is, one, I apologize for looking down a lot. And I always talk with my hands a lot anyway, but I was looking down a lot because I'm realizing that I'm actually really super emotional about all of this. And it's hard for me to sometimes focus when I get this hyper. And for my final thought is, I may be preaching to the choir in this audience for anybody who's signing into a Redneck Gone Green podcast. But if, you hear of anybody trying to go to Maui or do a thing in Maui or provide, donations or organize this, that, or like, I cannot be clear about this unless it's being requested, directed, and organized by a truly indigenous, group that's doing the mutual aid work already on the ground. Don't get involved. Don't mess with it. Leave it alone. Only seriously, just follow the lead of the folks who are working on the ground, who are actually from that affected community, and the indigenous folks that are doing that work.
So folks, you've been listening to and or watching Redneck Gone Green. I'm your host, David Cobb. We've been talking to Michelle Eddelman-McCormick. Michelle is a co-founder of Cooperation Vermont, is creating a community land trust using these radical ideas, is an all-around kick-ass organizer and human being. And for those, remember, like, comment, share. And for those of you who stuck it out to the very bitter end, Jack, come on with me, because I want you to tell folks we got a special episode of Redneck Gone Green, 2 in 1 week. Tell us about it, Jack.
Well, I am really very excited to point out that on Thursday, we're going to be having a special Redneck Gone Green response to the Republican debate that will be happening on Wednesday night. So I'm very excited about that. That will be a new thing. Please do join us. We don't have an exact time that we're going to be on for that one, but we will announce it. So if you're not already subscribed to our Substack, please do. All right. And yeah, thanks again. Definitely please like, share, and subscribe. And I'm going to let David sign us out. It's great to have everybody here. Thanks so much for being part of it.
And remember, folks, thank you so much, Jack. Thank you again, Michelle Eddelman-McCormick. You know, I love you. I so much appreciate you. And I appreciate you, the viewer and listener. And I'm going to sign off the way I sign off every time. Like, we are in a crisis. It's not coming. It's here. And what we do now is critically important. And from my perspective, I'm planning to live in a new world, not just to talk about it, not just to vision it. And so for me, I can't stop, won't stop. Join us here every week where we do deep dives onto what is to be done. Peace, love, and rage, y'all.